So an important issue in promoting sustainable development is about tools and also about economic tools. As you probably can see, we have different tools. One is command and control. The authority, the government, sets some targets by law, and then the firms and the citizens must obey. Command and control. And then, as a state, I will control that you obey the law. So it's quantitative measures. For instance, you were surprised that in Italy we sell fruits enveloped in plastics. Okay? There are some hygienic law or standard, whatever, that ask to supermarket to sell a lot of plastic. Green taxes or subsidies. So we have, this is clear, so I put tax. So economic incentive or disincentive. Then we have marketable permits, which are a combination of the two, of taxes and standard. We will see. And then we have voluntary instruments like corporate social responsibility and others, labeling, certification, which usually are voluntary. Among the economic tools, we have also, for instance, bottle fees. Okay? What is a bottle fee? A bottle fee, you have a plastic bottle, then you buy not only the Coke or the water which is inside, but you buy also the bottle, and if you give it back, you will get some money back, like 20 cents, and the bottle fee system was very used in the past, at least in Europe, for glass, and is already used in many countries. And then we had a period in Europe that we forgot about bottle fees. And now in Germany, in Austria, and in at least in UK, they again have a bottle fee. How much is it in Germany, a bottle fee? 25 cents.
15.
Pardon? It depends on the type of the bottle, yes. Usually, because in Germany they introduce a hard bottle that you can reuse. So when you give it back, the firms will process it, clean it, and reuse, and just the one-use bottle, and the fee is different. For the one-use bottle is 25, and for the other is 15. Yeah. So also bottle fees are an important tool. So command and control. I will go very quick for about the concepts, and then we will stop and go slowly for the math. Command and control, as I said, is obeying a rule. And then the state has to control. And then the first is to start and decide the standards. And then we can have, for instance, as you can see, a maximum rate of emissions, for instance. You can emit up to this level, and you cannot emit more. Okay? Or then we can also have standards about the processes. Okay? So we can have many different types of standards. The process, the quality of the environment, the total amount of behavior. For instance, we have standards on cars. Okay? What is the maximum amount of emissions of a given type of car? And we have this concept of compliance cost. Compliance cost, of course, if I change the regulation, if I put a standard, firms must adapt and change their behavior. And this will involve some costs. Compliance cost. The costs for obeying the standards. Maybe there are some firms which are very good from an environmental point of view, and so they don't have any cost. But there are some other firms that they will have to adapt the plant. Maybe they have to change the production process. Maybe they have to put filters in the production process. So there is something that we need to do in order to obey the new law. And this is the compliance cost of meeting the standard. Compliance cost. Economics of enforcement. Okay? Then we can ask, has a firm, a firm can decide to obey or not obey, to comply or not comply. In many instances, it is better not to obey the law and taking the risk of getting a fine. Okay? I don't care about the law. I hope that they will not check, they will not control. If I am caught, I will pay a fine. And so, what is the problem? The problem is to have a fine which is enough to induce people to obey the law, to obey the standard. Okay? Because suppose that you are not allowed to smoke. And then the fine for smoking is 10 cents. And maybe nobody controls for you if you smoke. Then you smoke and you don't care about the fine, and if someone comes, you pay 10 cents, and that's it. So you don't have incentives to smoke. So what would you suggest to do in this case? How is it possible to induce people and firms to comply? To raise the fine. Okay? Oh, don't worry. I'll put a very high fine. So everyone will comply. Is it true? Why? For instance, I put a fine for smoking of 1,000 euro. If I am a policeman and if I find one smoking, then the fine will be 1,000 euro. Why will this not work? Suppose you are caught smoking. Yeah.
It's not practical.
It's not?
It's not practical. So
practical. Why?
Somebody is caught and they have to pay 1,000 euros. You don't want to pay 1,000 euros.
Yes.
So you would object and
try
find another solution, and it's not. It doesn't seem fair to pay 1,000 euros.
Yeah, but what is the other solution? Suppose I'm a policeman and ask you 1,000 euro. First of all, you can go to a court. Okay? And then you go to a court, and then you say, this is not fair, and whatever, and then there will be some time elapsing, and so on. So the level of of cases in a court will increase a lot, okay, in general.
Also corruption, maybe.
Corruption. Since the fine is 1,000 euro, he will be willing to say, look, I will never do it again and so on. Please go away, forget this. Here are 50 euros. Okay? And as a policeman, I shouldn't accept. But maybe I will accept 50 euros, or maybe I can accept 100 euros. But if the fine is 5 euros, he will never try to bribe me. Okay, so it's always difficult to find a level of fine which involve real compliance in actual terms, okay, in reality. It's fine? But this problem is for any kind of law. It is for economic incentives, for standards, or okay, for any policy which is set by the law. So, non-compliance. Standards. Standards are very popular, the most popular, because there are many reasons why the standards are popular. We are usually more used to standards. For normal people, it is easier to understand standards, but at the same time, also firms sometimes prefer standards because they just have to adapt the plant and they don't have to do anything else. Or maybe their plants are already okay. So for the firms, in most cases, standards are preferred by entrepreneurs. Okay? As we said, there are several types of standards. We have standards on the basis of the state of the environment. We have standards on the basis on the emissions. And of course, what is a problem with standard based on the emission? Suppose that I say you can, for instance, for health, because smoking harms health, and then I will spend a lot for hospitals and the rest. I put a maximum of 6 cigarettes per person, okay, per day or whatever. This is a kind of policy, a standard on the number of cigarettes that anyone can smoke per day. And this is fine, because this is related to the personal health. But suppose that I put a maximum number of emissions per firm. 10 tons of carbon per firm. If I have 3 firms, the total amount of emissions is 30. If I have 5 firms, the total amount of emission is 50. So a problem with the emission standards is that the total emissions is related to the number of firms or individual or number of agents. So usually they are combined. The standard, which is standards are usually based both on the total or on the quality of the environment and also on the emissions per capita. Okay? You have technology standards, as I've said, about processes, about cars, how much can they emit, and so on. We have, so on the slides, you will have the opportunity to read. how much? What is the level of standard that the authority should fix? Okay? What is the maximum amount of emissions that we should? So what is the target? This is one issue. The other is the issue of dynamic incentives, because usually things changes. If I make a law today and then people adapt to the law, but meanwhile technology has evolved. And so firms have no incentives to move to a better technology, to a less polluting technology, to a more sustainable technology. What is the way out is to do a new law every year, perhaps, or every 2 years. And sometimes standards are, because of this reason, can be set in a dynamic way. By 2020, the total emission must be this. By 2025, a lower level. But it's always difficult to guess the rate of progress of technology. Who knows about 2030? What will be the viable level of emission? What will be the processes and so on? So standards do not provide dynamic incentives to change behavior. No? And then the third point is heterogeneity. So people are different. When you play volleyball, do you play volleyball? Who plays volleyball? Raise your hands.
I play.
Or in any sports. You have different roles. Why? Because people are different. Firms are different. So maybe there are some firms who have very good environmental performances. Some other have bad environmental performances. If I put a standard, I force everyone to play the same role. Okay? Even if one person is, I don't know the name of the different roles in volleyball, but anyway, you understand. Okay? In volleyball, of course, there is some turnation of positions, but the roles remain the same. You have a free player who is usually not tall. Okay? So I cannot force a very tall player to play as a free. Why? Because her performance will be very low. A woman who is 2 meters tall will not be able to play as a free player in volleyball. And so we have the same idea. If I put a rule which is the same for everyone, perhaps the total outcome is not so good. We can improve the total outcome if everyone plays the role who can play better. Okay? So, a typical way which is used by economists to set the total emissions, the targets, is this picture. I say it is a typical way by the economists. So now we are discussing about choosing the target. Okay? Choosing the target. How much? What is the level of pollution that we want? And the idea is that if we have pollution, we have some social costs. And we have also marginal social costs. And what is the marginal social cost? this line. How is done this line? What is the property? For instance, you can see that here you have emissions, for instance, per year on the x-axis. So for low level of emissions, we can imagine that the social damage is rather low. Then we have an intermediate area, and then we have that for very high level of emissions, then any tons more will produce very high damage. Is it clear? So a kind of pollution is more and more damaging. Okay, and this is the normal idea. For low level of emission, the marginal social damage is rather low. But when pollution increases, then there will be a level beyond which pollution is very high. And the damage from pollution is very, very high. This is very much related with the idea of thresholds. Now, we cannot, in some cases, we have seen this in the lectures about Anthropocene. We don't have to surpass a given threshold. After the threshold, the damage will increase a lot. And this is the graphic representation of that. Okay? Suppose, for instance, that this is a threshold. After this threshold, so we can do another picture. We can have, for instance, that for low level, the marginal damage is low, but then we have an intermediate area where the marginal damage increases, and then after the thresholds, the marginal damage goes to infinity. Marginal, as for any economic variable, we have for instance, the derivatives of f with respect to x, which is, for instance, in discrete terms, you have the variation of our function with respect to a unitary variation of our independent variable. Okay, if I pollute 1 unit more, then f, that is the damage, will increase by, for instance, 5. Okay, marginal damage. What is this other curve? It is the marginal abatement cost. Suppose that there is no law about pollution. Okay, and in this case, the firms pollute, have this emission level. The total emission level is this one. Then we ask them to reduce pollution. So they will bear some costs. They will have some costs to reduce emissions. And we can think that if they have to reduce a small quantity, their cost will increase, but not that much. But as long as we ask them to reduce a lot, their cost will strongly increase. Okay? And so, depending on the direction, we can also read this in the opposite direction. Is it fine? So, in this case, we can see this as the marginal abatement costs. Okay? If I will have to abate, and I'm very close to the level of no abatement, my marginal costs are rather low. If I have to go very far from where I am now, my marginal abatement cost will be very high. So what is the idea behind this? Is kind of balancing, as we have in economics, the trade-off. Suppose that we don't want pollution, zero pollution. Is it a good idea? No, because in order to have zero pollution, we don't have to produce, at least in an industrial way. So, of course, it would be very nice from a health point of view and so on, but at the same time, we don't have, we have to pump out water from the ground by hands and whatever. We cannot use fossil fuels and so on. So for our welfare, it is better to use some oil or some gas. Okay? At the same time, if we pollute too much, then again, this is bad. Because our life is very comfortable. You use a lot of fossil fuel, but at the same time, we have a lot of environmental problems. We have floods, catastrophes, or pollution. We get some illness and so on. So the idea of the economists is that there should be something in between. Okay, so this is the idea of optimal pollution. Because if you go to a bar and talk with friends about optimal pollutions, then the other one will look at you. What the hell are you saying, optimal pollution? Of course. But the idea is this idea of we like a comfortable life and with no, and so we need a compromise. Okay? This is the approach by the economists. But a compromise does not require marginal calculation. Okay, we can get a compromise without using this kind of tool. So what is peculiar in economics is that we pretend to use marginal calculation to establish the target. Okay? And in particular, of course, we can estimate marginal abatement cost. It's easy. It is somehow easy. There are some technology, and then I can ask a firm, you have to reduce your emissions, and then the firms will look for some remedies from some technology for reducing pollution, and this will involve some costs. So somehow the concept is reasonable. When you talk about marginal social damages, what is that? We will talk about more next, but of course social damages can be everything, and the nature of social damages will be very different. Okay, and at the end of the lecture, we will discuss this issue more in detail. But at least the idea is to be suspicious. And why, according to the economists, this is a good idea? Because we can suppose that, this comes from, you can have, from minimizing the costs. I can minimize, I want to minimize the sum of the abatement cost plus the social cost. Okay? And then, of course, if you minimize, the first order condition is that the marginal is to equate marginal values. Dynamic incentives, we talk about that. And we talk about flexibility. Now, let's have a look at taxes. Now, you can also perhaps write tax on, let's do the most easy case. we have a good X, named X, labeled X, which is very polluting. Then we might introduce a tax on this polluting good. Yes. And suppose that we have perfect competition. What does it? How do we? What is the implication of perfect competition on prices? Firms are price takers, so price is given. So the easiest model. And what is the profit? The profit pi is equal to the revenue, which is P times X, the price of the good, X times the quantity, which is revenue. We have minus total cost minus T times X. What is T? Is a unitary tax. Each liter of gasoline, you have to pay 50 cents. Okay? This is a tax in this case, a tax on the quantity. In most cases, taxes are, for instance, on added value, the VAT tax. The VAT. What is VAT? It's value added tax. In this case, it's even more simple, because it's on a unitary tax per quantity. Okay? Is it clear? So you have TC is total cost, and we want to maximize profits. Hence, the derivatives of profits must be equal to what? To 0. Is it fine? Is it okay? When you have a function and you want to maximize, here the derivatives is 0. Of course, the derivatives is 0 also in a minimum. This is why the first derivatives to be 0 is only a necessary but not a sufficient condition. So we need the derivative of the profits to be 0. What is the derivative of the profits with respect to X? Is P minus the marginal cost minus T. Does everyone agree with that? So marginal revenue must be equal marginal cost, and marginal revenue is P minus T, which must be equal to marginal cost. So the higher the T, the lower production, and we can have a nice picture, easy picture. Suppose that total cost is X squared. You have marginal cost is 2X, the derivative, okay? And suppose that T is 0. Then you have to say 2X, and so suppose that you have this marginal cost, and suppose that the price is 80. And if the price is 80, then we have that the quantity produced of the good is 40. Are you with me? Suppose now that you have a unitary tax of 30. So what does it mean? You can have what will imply? This will imply that the marginal cost shifts upwards. How much? By 30. So we will have a new optimal point, which is, in this case, 25. So, of course, the higher the tax, the lower the amount of goods which is produced. And this is valid at the individual firms. So we can aggregate this. So a tax will shift upwards the supply for this good, of the aggregate supply of this good with many firms. And now we can have two cases. Suppose that the demand elasticity is much bigger than the supply elasticity. One curve is much steeper than the other. Do you know what elasticity is? If you don't know, have a look on Wikipedia or somewhere, because it's very, very important to know. And you can see, perhaps, because of the sun, you might be... Can you see it? Yes. So if we have a unitary tax, the supply curve will shift upwards. And then, in this case, what will be the consequence? What we will have? Will the price increase? Not very much. Will the quantity reduce? Yes. So if we are in this case, the tax on the good is very effective in reducing the quantity of the good, of the polluting good, very highly polluting good. At the same time, if we have the opposite case, if we have that the demand curve is less elastic than the supply, and then on purpose I left some words in Italian, so because you are in Italy and you are in Pisa and you can, it's rather similar to English. Se l'elasticità della domanda is less than elasticità dell'offerta. Of course, we will have a strong response in terms of prices. Price will increase. Why? Because the demand is not elastic. People want that good. So they are not willing to renounce to this good. So the sellers can transfer most of the tax on consumers. They will be able to increase the price. And the quantity of X will reduce, but not very much. So if the demand is less elastic than the supply, a tax on a good will not be effective in reducing the quantity of that good. Okay? In general. This is a relation which holds for any type of goods or services. And most of the tax will be transferred to the consumers. So, standard of taxes. If we have perfect information, identical firms, and a given technology, then we will get the same results with taxes or standards. And suppose that we have this picture, okay? Then we say, okay, there are some, there is a target. I want to have a lower production of this good. Then I can levy a tax, and the supply curve will shift upwards. We are talking about the tax on supply, but the same would apply if we put a measure on the demand, of course. It's just the simple case. Now the more intuitive case is to place a tax on a firm. Okay, then we will get that price, as we have seen, but at the same time, we might say it is not allowed to produce more than that quantity. Okay, I give a standard, and of course I will fix a maximum to that quantity, and the price will be given by the market. Okay? In one case, the government sets the quantity, and the market response is in terms of prices. In the other case, the government sets the tax that will raise the price, and the market will respond with the desired quantity, with a target quantity. Okay? So you can either, just to put it simply, you can either let's go back one step here. Okay? So now you suppose that you want to get here. Okay? Then you can either fix a standard, and so if you are able to enforce the law, you will get this level, or you can put a price. And you, as a state, you decide the price. How? By putting the tax, and the market will respond with this quantity. Is it clear? So either a standard or incentives will work in the same way, and they will get the target. So either I manipulate the price or I set the standard, there will be no difference. However, reality is not like that. We don't have perfect information. Firms are not identical. Technology evolves, and so on. This is the reason why economists say that taxes are better. So the next step is to have a look at the taxes on emissions. Standard taxes. So we said that we have So now let's model taxes on emissions. Let's suppose that you have tax H on emissions. E. E is the amount of emissions for the firm pay